He cried when I told him I was leaving. His voice cracked, his hands shook, and he swore he couldn't live without me. For a moment, I believed him, until I found out who he was really crying for. That night, the air in our living room felt heavy, like the house itself knew something final was about to happen. The curtains were half closed, the lamp threw a dull yellow light across the floor, and all I could hear was his breathing. Uneven, almost panicked. I'd imagined this moment so many times, but it didn't feel the way I expected. I thought I'd feel powerful walking away. Instead, I just felt empty. He sat on the couch, staring at the floor, his fingers pressed together like he was praying. I stood near the door, clutching my bag as if holding it tighter would stop my hands from shaking. He looked up at me, eyes red, and said my name in a voice that sounded like a child's. "Please don't do this," he whispered. "We can fix it. I can fix it." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But there was nothing left to fix. The love that once held us together had turned into something quiet and cold, something that made me feel small every time I was near him. I had spent too many nights trying to understand how we got here, from slow mornings with coffee and laughter, to sitting in silence, counting the spaces between our words. He stood up and came closer. I could see his chest rising and falling too fast. "I'll change," he said. "I'll be better. You just have to give me another chance." His voice trembled. He took my hand, and for a moment, I almost forgot why I was leaving. That's the dangerous thing about memories. They can make you forgive things you shouldn't. But then I saw the reflection of myself in the mirror behind him. My eyes were dull. My smile was gone. I didn't recognize the woman standing there. That reflection reminded me why I packed my bag in the first place. I pulled my hand back gently and said, "I can't do this anymore." He laughed. Not out of amusement, but disbelief. It was the kind of laugh people make when they're trying to wake themselves from a nightmare. "You're serious," he said, as if the idea of me leaving had never been real until now. He looked around the room, his eyes darting to the photos on the wall. Our wedding picture, the beach trip, the night we moved into this house. He said, "Everything we'd been through, you're just throwing it away?" I didn't answer. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. He sank to the couch, his shoulders shaking. I watched him cover his face with both hands and cry. It wasn't quiet crying. It was loud, broken, raw. The kind of sound that comes from deep inside, from a place that feels like death. And I stood there, frozen, because a part of me still loved him. Even after everything, even after the lies I couldn't prove but felt in my bones, I still cared. For a few minutes, I almost changed my mind. I thought maybe this was what I wanted, to see him realize what he was losing. Maybe this was how we would start again, from the ashes of everything we'd ruined. But then he said something that didn't fit. Through his tears, he mumbled, "I can't lose her." Her. I don't even think he noticed he said it. His face was buried in his hands, his voice muffled, but I heard it. A single word that sliced through the fog in my head. My heart skipped, my breath caught in my throat, and I felt the room tilt slightly. I wanted to ask who he meant, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked past him toward the hallway, pretending I didn't hear it. He kept crying, saying he was sorry, saying he couldn't live without me, saying he would change. The words blurred together, and I found myself standing by the door, staring at the handle, trying to gather the courage to walk out. My body felt heavy, but my mind was finally clear. When I opened the door, the cold night air hit me. It smelled like rain. I looked back one last time. He was still sitting there, a broken man in a room full of memories. And for a moment, I did feel sorry for him. Not because he lost me, but because I realized he had already lost himself long before I decided to leave. I walked down the steps slowly, every movement feeling like a goodbye. The street was quiet, no cars, no voices, just the sound of wind brushing through the trees. I got into my car and sat there for a minute, staring at the house that had once been our home. I could see the faint shadow of him through the window, still hunched over, still crying. A part of me wanted to go back, to comfort him, to tell him I'd stay until he could breathe again. But that part of me had done enough dying already. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed. A message from him. Just 2 words, "Please stop." I didn't reply. I put the phone face down on the seat and drove away. For the first few minutes, I felt a strange mix of relief and pain. Leaving isn't easy, even when it's the right thing to do. The memories don't disappear just because you do. But as the city lights faded behind me, one question kept echoing in my mind, the one word I couldn't forget. Her. Who was she? The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, and for the first time, I realized that maybe his tears weren't about me at all. Maybe they were never meant for me. It's strange how love doesn't disappear all at once. It slips away slowly, like water leaking through cracks you didn't know were there. One day, everything feels normal. Laughter in the kitchen, lazy Sunday mornings, plans for the future. And then one morning, you wake up beside someone who feels like a stranger wearing the face of the person you used to love. That's how it happened with us. Quietly, gradually, without a clear moment I could point to and say, that's when it broke. At first, it was the small things. He stopped looking at me the way he used to. You know that look, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. I noticed it during dinner one night when I caught him staring at his phone instead of listening to me. I was telling him about something at work, something I thought was funny, and when I looked up, he was scrolling. He didn't even pretend to care. I laughed it off then, made a joke about him being addicted to his phone, but deep down, it hurt. It was the first time I felt invisible in my own marriage. The next few weeks, his attention drifted more and more. He'd come home later, claiming traffic or extra hours at work. He'd smell faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, and his shirt would have the kind of wrinkles that didn't come from sitting at a desk. When I asked how his day was, he'd say, fine, and nothing more. That was his favorite word lately, fine. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. I tried to hold on. I cooked his favorite meals, left small notes in his lunch bag like I used to, even bought new lingerie, hoping to spark something. For a little while, it worked. He smiled more, touched me more, but there was something missing behind his eyes. It was like kissing someone who was already gone. Then came the nights he didn't come home on time. The excuses piled up like bricks. A late meeting, a broken-down car, a friend who needed him. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that every marriage goes through phases, that maybe we were just in a rough patch. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that something was wrong. I remember one night in particular. It was past midnight, and I was sitting in bed with the lamp still on, pretending to read. I heard his car pull up, the soft click of the door, and then his footsteps. When he walked in, he smiled like nothing was out of place. He kissed my forehead and said, "You're still up?" I asked where he'd been, and he said, "Just with the guys." I wanted to ask which ones, what bar, what time he left, but I didn't. I just nodded and turned off the light. But I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring into the dark, listening to him breathe beside me, wondering what lie he'd have told if I had pushed harder. That's when I realized that love can be quieter than silence. The next morning, I found something. It wasn't anything dramatic, not lipstick on a collar or a secret text. It was a receipt, a dinner for two at a restaurant we'd never been to. The date was 2 nights before, the total was high, and the time stamped at 10:47 p.m. I remember staring at that slip of paper for a long time, my hands trembling, my chest tight. When I showed it to him, he didn't even blink. He smiled and said, "Oh, that's from work. I had dinner with a client." I asked who, and he said a name I didn't recognize. When I pressed further, he laughed softly and said, "You don't trust me, do you?" That was his trick, turning my questions into accusations, making me feel guilty for even asking. After that, I stopped looking for proof. Not because I believed him, but because I knew the truth was already there, hiding between every lie he told. I didn't want confirmation, I just wanted peace. But peace never came. He became more secretive. He changed his phone password. He started taking calls outside, in the backyard, saying he needed fresh air. When I asked to see his messages once, he said, "You're invading my privacy." I laughed bitterly at that. Privacy in a marriage. The word sounded foreign coming from him. Some nights, he would come home smelling of someone else's perfume. Not overpowering, just enough to sting. I would stand close to him and pretend I didn't notice, even though every breath felt like swallowing poison. The distance between us grew until it felt like we were living in separate worlds under the same roof. The house got quieter. Meals became mechanical. We stopped saying, "Good morning." He slept facing the other side of the bed, and I stopped reaching out. I used to count the seconds it took for him to fall asleep. Then one night, I realized I wasn't counting anymore. I just didn't care. There was one evening I'll never forget. We were watching a movie, and a scene came on where a man confessed to cheating on his wife. She forgave him, and they hugged as music played. I turned to look at my husband, expecting some reaction, maybe discomfort, maybe guilt. He didn't flinch. He just said, "Some women are too emotional," and took another sip of his drink. I felt my stomach twist. That was the moment I knew the man I loved was gone. After that night, I started sleeping on the couch more often. I told him it was because of my back, but it was because I couldn't bear the sound of his breathing anymore. Every exhale felt like a lie whispered in the dark. And yet, part of me still hoped. I told myself maybe he was just lost. Maybe if I loved him harder, if I forgave the distance, he'd come back. Love makes fools out of all of us. But love without honesty is just loneliness disguised as loyalty. I didn't know it yet, but the moment was coming. The one where my quiet suspicions would turn into undeniable truth. Where the fading love would finally go dark. Where I'd learn that every tear he'd ever cried had a name behind it that wasn't mine. And when that truth came, it wouldn't just end our marriage. It would rewrite everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. The signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. It's easier to live inside the illusion of love than to face the possibility that you've been loving a lie. But lies have a smell, a sound, a rhythm that doesn't fit. Eventually, even silence starts to feel suspicious. It began one night when I was doing laundry. His phone was on the counter, buzzing every few seconds. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, a short name, feminine, followed by a heart emoji. My hands froze on a pile of towels. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe a coworker, maybe someone from his gym. But then another message appeared. Can't stop thinking about last night. The floor might as well have vanished beneath me. My chest tightened, my breath came in short bursts, and I felt my fingers tremble. I didn't open the phone. I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, staring at it until the screen went dark again. Then I heard his footsteps in the hall. He walked in, saw me standing there, and smiled. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded too quickly. He reached for his phone, and I handed it to him. He didn't even look at the screen. He just slipped it into his pocket and kissed me on the cheek. "You're quiet tonight," he said, and left the room. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in endless circles. I thought about the message, about the name, about what last night's meant. Every detail of the past few weeks started rearranging itself in my memory. The late nights. The sudden interest in aftershave. The way he smiled at his phone like it held the secret to happiness. By morning, I convinced myself I was imagining things. That's what denial does. It protects you from shattering. It whispers lies so you don't have to face the truth. I told myself maybe it was a friend joking around, maybe I misunderstood. But deep down, something inside me shifted. I started noticing everything. The way he angled his phone away from me. The way he carried it into the bathroom now. The way he'd go outside to make a call after dinner. Once, I followed him quietly to the kitchen and heard his voice low and soft saying, "I miss you too." When he saw me standing there, he jumped, smiled, and said he was talking to his boss. I didn't ask which one. That night, I sat on the couch after he went to bed, staring at my hands. They looked older somehow, tired. I realized I had become someone I never wanted to be, a woman measuring her worth against another woman she'd never met. A few days later, I decided to test him. I told him I'd be working late. I didn't. I parked my car around the corner from our house and waited. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. After half an hour, his car pulled out of the driveway. He wasn't wearing work clothes. He was dressed like he used to when we first met, casual, confident, clean-shaven. My stomach dropped. I followed him for a while, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. He drove across town and parked in front of a small cafe, the kind of place people go to hide, not to be seen. I watched him sit inside, across from a woman. I couldn't see her face clearly, just her hair. Long, dark, tied in a low ponytail. She laughed at something he said, and he reached across the table to touch her hand. It was like watching someone else's movie. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb, watching the man I married smile like a stranger. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Every moment we'd shared suddenly felt like a lie rehearsed to perfection. I don't know how long I sat there. When he finally left, I didn't follow him home. I drove to the ocean instead. The night was cold, the air heavy with salt. I stood by the water, the waves crashing at my feet, and thought about how love and pain come from the same place in the body. They both live in the chest. They both make it hard to breathe. When I got home, he was asleep, his arm draped over the side of the bed. His phone was charging on the nightstand. I stared at it for a long time. I wanted to look through it, to confirm what I already knew, but I didn't. I didn't need proof anymore. Proof was just pain spelled out in pixels. The next morning, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek on his way out, said, "You're amazing, you know that?" I smiled and said, "I know." Inside, I was falling apart. That day marked the beginning of my double life. The part of me that acted like everything was fine, and the part that watched it all crumble quietly inside. I became an expert at pretending. I laughed at his jokes, planned dinners, smiled at friends. But every time I looked at him, I saw that cafe, that laugh, that touch. One night, we went out with friends, and he held my hand under the table. I remember thinking how absurd it was, the warmth of his skin against mine while my heart felt cold. I wanted to pull away, to expose him right there, but I didn't. I just stared at our hands and thought, this is what it looks like when love becomes performance. It went on like that for weeks. Pretending became survival. But inside, something was shifting. I wasn't the same woman who begged for honesty or hoped for love to come back. I was quietly collecting pieces of strength I didn't know I had. I knew the end was coming. I just didn't know when or how. The night it happened, I didn't plan it. Sometimes, endings happen like accidents, sudden and irreversible. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when his phone buzzed again. He was in the shower. I don't know what made me look this time. Maybe I was tired of feeling blind. The message preview said, "I can't stop thinking about your hands." My stomach turned. Then another one appeared. "Same time tomorrow?" That was it. The moment when love finally died. Not with screaming, not with tears, but with two quiet messages glowing on a phone screen. I put the phone down, wiped my hands on a towel, and stared at my reflection in the window. My eyes looked calm. Too calm. I realized I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was done. And that's when I decided I would leave him. Not because he cheated, but because I had finally stopped waiting for him to love me again. The morning I decided to leave felt strangely ordinary. The sky was gray, soft rain tapping against the windows, and the house smelled faintly of coffee. He was humming in the kitchen, as if the world hadn't already shifted inside me. I stood by the window, staring at the street below, and I knew this was the last day I'd ever stand here as his wife. It wasn't rage or heartbreak that made me leave. It was the quiet kind of exhaustion that settles in after you've cried too many times, forgiven too many lies, and stayed too long in a place that no longer feels like home. I packed slowly, folding clothes with mechanical precision, slipping a few essentials into a suitcase, nothing more. I didn't want anything from him except freedom. He walked in while I was zipping the bag. "What are you doing?" he asked, laughing like I was joking. I didn't answer. His smile faltered. "Wait, you're serious?" he said, stepping closer. "You can't just leave. Not like this." I looked at him and felt nothing. No hate, no love, just a hollow calm. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." He blinked as if I had spoken another language. "You're overreacting," he said. "It was just—" He stopped, realizing he'd almost said too much. My heart tightened. I hadn't even mentioned why I was leaving, but his guilt had already shown its face. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." That's when his panic set in. He stepped in front of the door, blocking my way, his voice shaking. "Please, just listen to me. I love you. Whatever you think happened, it's not what it looks like." His words were desperate, rehearsed. I'd heard them before in smaller lies. "Then what does it look like?" I asked softly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you gave everything I thought we had to someone else." He started crying then. Real tears, not the kind you fake to win an argument. His body trembled, his voice broke. "I can't lose you," he said. "I'll die without you." I almost believed him. He had that gift, making his pain sound like proof of love. But something in me had changed. I saw his tears differently now. They weren't for me, they were for him, for the image of himself he had destroyed. He fell to his knees, clutching at my hand. "You're my everything," he whispered. "Please don't go." For a heartbeat, I hesitated. It's strange how love lingers even after it's been poisoned. My eyes filled with tears, and I hated myself for still feeling something for him. But then, in the middle of his begging, I heard him mumble something that turned my blood cold. "I can't lose her," he said. "Her." I froze. He must have realized what he said because his grip loosened instantly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, his mouth opening like he was searching for words that didn't exist. I took a step back. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He just stared at me like a man cornered in his own lies. "Say it," I said again, louder this time. "Who is she?" He stood up slowly, shaking his head. "You're twisting my words," he muttered. "I didn't mean—" "Stop lying," I cut him off. My voice cracked, anger seeping through the calm I'd been clinging to. "You said you'd die without me, and 2 seconds later you're crying over someone else. Who is she?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. My heart felt like stone, heavy but steady. He reached out, grabbed my arm, and whispered, "Please, don't do this. We can start over." "Start over from what?" I asked. "From the lie? From the betrayal? From the moment you stopped seeing me?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing hard, his eyes red and lost. I pulled free and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, sharp and clean, and I felt my lungs expand for the first time in months. Behind me, I could still hear him calling my name. His voice cracked, then broke into sobs. I kept walking. The sound faded as I reached the car, but the image of him crying stayed with me. Not because I pitied him, but because I finally understood. His tears weren't grief. They were panic. He wasn't mourning me. He was mourning the loss of control. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my chest rising and falling fast. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me. A message from him. I didn't want to look, but I did. It said, "You're making a mistake. She means nothing." She. There it was again. He couldn't even hide it anymore. I stared at that message for a long time. My reflection in the screen looked strange, calm, expressionless. I wasn't the same woman who had been afraid to confront him. I was someone else now, someone who had finally seen the truth. Before I could put the car in gear, another message appeared. But it wasn't from him. It was from an unknown number. It said, "Is he coming?" My stomach dropped. I stared at the text, every word pounding like a heartbeat. "Is he coming?" I looked back at the house. The lights were still on. His shadow moved past the window. My mind raced. I typed a reply before I could stop myself. "Who is this?" A few seconds later, a message came back. "You must be his wife." For a moment, the world went still. Rain tapped against the windshield, faint and rhythmic, as if time itself was waiting for my reaction. I typed, "Who are you?" No reply. Just silence. I sat there, gripping the phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely breathe. My heart felt like it was tearing in half. The woman's message, simple, casual, confident, said more than any confession ever could. I turned the key in the ignition, but I didn't drive away. I just sat there, staring at the house where my life had come apart, where my husband was probably already texting her back. And I thought, so this is what the end feels like. Not an explosion, not a scream, just the quiet realization that love has become a stranger's phone number. When I finally drove off, I didn't cry. Not a single tear. I was done giving him the satisfaction of my pain. But as the headlights cut through the rain and the house disappeared behind me, his voice echoed in my mind, trembling, desperate, pathetic. "I can't lose her." And in that moment, I knew he already had. I didn't plan to contact her. For the first few days after I left, I tried to pretend she didn't exist. I packed my things into boxes, moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, and told myself I was free. But freedom doesn't come instantly. It arrives in pieces, carried by pain and clarity. And no matter how far I went, her shadow followed me. I didn't even know her name, but her presence was everywhere. In the silence of my phone, in the way his voice still echoed in my head, in every question I couldn't stop asking myself. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Did she know about me? Did she care? For weeks, I told myself the answers didn't matter. But one sleepless night, around 2 in the morning, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my laptop. Our vacations, our dinners, his smiles, and all I could think was that somewhere in those moments, she existed too. Maybe he texted her while I was in the shower. Maybe he thought of her when he kissed me goodnight. The thought burned through me like acid. I couldn't resist anymore. I went back to that message. "Is he coming?" And opened the number. No photo, no name. Just 10 digits that had already changed everything. I stared at it for a long time before typing, "Who are you?" The message stayed delivered. No reply. The next morning, I woke up to a new message. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I froze. My breath caught. The words were polite, almost gentle, but they hit harder than any insult could. I typed back, "You knew he was married." She responded almost instantly. "He said it was over. He said you'd moved out months ago." I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that startled even me. "Of course he did," I wrote. "He's been lying to both of us." There was a long pause. Then she wrote, "I didn't believe him at first, but then he started crying when he talked about you. I thought he still loved you." That line, "he cried when he talked about you," made my stomach twist. I imagined him, the same tears I'd seen the night I left, falling for another woman's sympathy. I typed, "He cried because he got caught, not because he loved me." This time, she didn't respond. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling, anger and pity mixing into something sour. I realized she wasn't the villain I wanted her to be. She was just another version of me, someone who believed his words, who mistook his brokenness for depth. Later that day, she called. Her voice was soft, shaky, like someone carrying guilt she didn't know how to put down. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't know what to believe. He told me things about you that weren't true. Like what? I asked, my tone flat. That you didn't care anymore, she said. That you'd stopped sleeping together. That you were staying only because you were afraid to be alone. I felt a sharp, bitter laugh rise in my throat. He's good at stories, I said. That's how he keeps people around, by convincing them they're saving him. There was silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, soft and uneven. Finally, she said, "He told me he loved me." I closed my eyes. "He told me the same thing while he was still seeing you," I said quietly. "So which one of us do you think he meant it to?" Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence felt like a confession. Then she whispered, "I think I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it." Her honesty caught me off guard. There was no malice in her voice, no arrogance, just regret. It was strange. I had imagined hating her, yelling at her, blaming her for everything. But now, listening to her break apart on the phone, I realized we were both victims of the same man. The difference was that I'd escaped. "Does he know you're talking to me?" I asked. She hesitated. "No. He'd lose his mind if he found out. He still calls me every day. He says he's sorry, that he wants to fix things, that he misses you more than he can explain." I laughed quietly. "He misses the person who forgave him," I said. "Not me. That woman's gone." We spoke for nearly an hour. By the end, I felt lighter. Not healed, but clearer. She told me she planned to end it with him too. I told her I hoped she would. We didn't promise to stay in touch. There was nothing left to connect us except pain. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying her voice, her trembling apologies, her disbelief. For the first time, I didn't feel jealous. I felt sorry for her. Because I knew exactly how it felt to love someone who could cry in your arms and lie in the same breath. 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment. I didn't tell him how he found me. I didn't want to know. He stood at my door, drenched from the rain, holding flowers like a man who thought gestures could erase sins. "I just need 5 minutes," he said. His voice was low, desperate. I stepped aside. "You've got two," I said. He looked around the small apartment like it was foreign territory. "You really left," he said, almost to himself. "I told you I would." He took a deep breath. "I made mistakes. I know that. But she doesn't mean anything. It was a stupid thing that went too far." I stared at him. "You said you loved her." He shook his head quickly. "I was confused. I didn't love her. I love you." The audacity of it made me laugh. "You told her you loved her. You told me you loved me. Which one of us was the practice run?" His jaw clenched. "Why are you talking to her?" "She reached out to me," I said simply. "She told me everything." For a moment, he went pale. His mask cracked. Then, just like always, he tried to rebuild it. "She's lying," he said. "You can't trust her." I stepped closer, my voice quiet but firm. "You used to tell me that about everyone. Anyone who saw the truth became a liar to you." He opened his mouth, but I stopped him. "You know what the saddest part is?" I said softly. "Even now, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry because you lost control, because your lies fell apart." He stood there, drenched and defeated, and for a moment I thought he might finally say something honest. But he didn't. He just whispered, "Please come home." I shook my head. "There's no home left." He stared at me for a long time, eyes red, face trembling, and for a brief second I saw something break in him. Not guilt, not love, but fear. Fear of being left alone with the person he really was. He left without another word. When the door closed behind him, I felt an emptiness I can't quite describe. Not sadness, not relief, just stillness. The storm had finally ended, but the silence that followed was its own kind of haunting. I sat by the window, watching the rain, and realized something that changed everything. He didn't cry because he loved me. He cried because the truth had finally caught up to him. The days after he left blurred together. Time didn't move normally anymore. Mornings came and went without meaning, and nights stretched long and hollow. I filled the silence with small rituals. Making coffee I never finished, rearranging books I didn't read, standing by the window just to feel that I still existed somewhere outside the memory of him. People say heartbreak feels like being shattered. For me, it was more like fading, like pieces of myself had scattered in every direction, and I was quietly trying to gather them back without letting anyone see the mess. I didn't cry. Not once. I thought I would. But the tears had already been spent long before I left him. When you've been mourning someone who's still alive for months, grief feels like a shadow that follows you quietly, not a wave that knocks you down. He called me a few times after that night at my apartment. Each call came from a different number, as if changing his contact could disguise the same voice that had lied to me too many times. I didn't answer. The first voicemail he left was long. Apologies, excuses, promises. He said he'd go to therapy, that he'd quit drinking, that he'd do anything if I just came home. The second voicemail was shorter, quieter, angrier. By the third one, he stopped saying my name. And then one morning, the call stopped. The silence that followed felt like a cold wind, harsh but freeing. I remember walking to the market that afternoon, the sky overcast but soft, and realizing I could breathe without feeling that constant weight pressing on my chest. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not for a message, not for a lie, not for a miracle. Just stillness. But stillness has its own kind of loneliness. I missed him in strange ways. Not the man he became, but the one I thought he was. The one who made me tea when I was sick, who danced with me in the kitchen, who whispered dreams into my hair. I missed a ghost, not a person. That's what love does sometimes. It leaves you haunted by memories that never existed the way you remember them. It took me weeks to stop checking my phone out of habit, to stop replaying old conversations in my head, wondering what words had been real. I used to think closure came from confrontation, from knowing every detail, every truth, but it doesn't. Closure comes from deciding that some answers will never heal you. One night, I couldn't sleep. The rain was falling again, the same soft rhythm as the night I left. I sat on my balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights shimmer through the wet air. I thought about her, the other woman, and wondered if she'd finally let him go. I hoped she had. We were both just women trying to survive the same lie told in different ways. My phone buzzed beside me. For a moment, I thought it was him again. But it wasn't. It was her. Just one message. I ended it. Thank you. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I stared at the screen for a long time, then put the phone face down. I didn't feel triumph or relief, just a quiet sadness for both of us. Two women who had loved the same man and lost pieces of themselves in the process. In the days that followed, I started rebuilding my life, one small step at a time. I got a new job. I bought fresh sheets. I filled my apartment with things that felt like mine. I laughed again, real laughter, not the forced kind that hides pain. Sometimes, I'd still catch myself wondering what he was doing, if he ever looked for me in old photos, or dreamt of me the way I used to dream of him. But the thought no longer hurt. It just felt distant, like something that happened to someone else. It's strange, how someone can be your whole world one day and a stranger the next. But that's how healing works, slowly, silently, until one morning you wake up and realize the ache in your chest isn't there anymore. You still remember, but it doesn't control you. The love that once felt like drowning becomes a quiet memory of who you used to be. Months later, I saw him by accident. I was in a grocery store, standing in the checkout line, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned, and there he was, thinner, tired, holding a carton of milk and a blank expression. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said my name. "Hey," I replied, just one word, calm, simple. He looked at me like I was someone he used to dream about. "You look good," he said. His voice was soft, careful. "Thanks," I said. "You too." There was a pause. The kind that used to be filled with emotion, now just empty air. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I smiled, not bitterly, not kindly, just honestly. "I know." And that was it. I paid for my things and walked out without looking back. The air outside felt crisp and new. For the first time, I realized the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, the woman who stayed too long, left too late, but eventually found her way out. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in months. I wrote about how love can turn into something dangerous when it's built on fear, how tears can be weapons in the hands of liars, how sometimes the hardest thing isn't leaving, it's forgiving yourself for staying. I ended the entry with one line, a truth that had taken me months to understand. Sometimes the person crying hardest isn't in pain, they're just terrified of losing control. And when I closed the journal, I smiled, because I finally understood what freedom felt like. Not forgetting, not pretending, but knowing the story no longer owned me.